Moss, and I'm here to talk about the NFL draft yet again. For those who tuned into our draft show, thank you for that. And obviously, there's so much to talk about after 3 days and hours on hours of the draft taking place. So, of course, we want to know grades and who had the best draft, who had the worst draft. And I'll start it off with the top draft, in my opinion. A lot of people went a lot of different ways. Some said the Raiders because they got so many players and so much talent at the top. I think the Chiefs had the best draft, which hurts to admit as a Buffalo fan. But when you look at the picks they made, they filled a lot of roster holes with very good talent, and they also got a lot of value late in the draft. They walk out of the first round with Mansour Delane, who, granted, I think they could have waited and not traded up and got him at 9, and Peter Woods at 29. And I think these picks not only fill the McDuffie hole that was left by the trade, but also allows Chris Jones to milk what's left of his career and Peter Woods to learn behind Chris Jones so that when his career is over, Woods can actually take place in the interior of that defensive line. Now, later in the draft, they got my second favorite running back in the class, Emmett Johnson. And I think this will be a great Pacheco replacement. But not only that, give them an actual running back that they haven't added in a little bit. Pacheco was okay, but he was very one-dimensional. Johnson gives you the ability to do a lot, and he can play all three downs. He can pass block, and he's willing to pass block. And then later in the draft, you have a QB coming off of a ACL tear, so it's never a bad idea to get some youth behind him, just in case something doesn't shake out. And they pick up Garrett Nussmeier, who was one of the better values of the draft this year. Now, my number 2 spot was the Raiders, and it's hard to not grade them very high, which all 3 of my top teams got A pluses. But it's hard to not grade the Raiders high because when you walk out of the draft with the top quarterback, national champion, Heisman winner, and then you come away with another 12 picks and 6 of them in the first 3 rounds, you're bound to have a ton of talent. Between him, Traden Stukes, and then later in the 4th round, trading up 1 pick and taking a flyer on Jermod McCoy, who was regarded by some as the best corner in the draft. They got him at 101. Now, there's injury concerns there, but if it does pan out, you use a 4th round pick on what could be a top corner in the NFL. So there's not really much risk there. There's a lot more reward, especially for a team that's not necessarily competitive in the immediate future. And speaking of not being competitive in the immediate future, the New York Jets, a lot of people didn't necessarily like their draft. I still thought they killed the draft. And the part that people don't see is this year's draft class didn't have many quarterbacks. The top quarterbacks were Fernando Mendoza and Trinidad Chambliss. And Chambliss ended up staying in college, so it just became Fernando Mendoza. So a lot of teams are just waiting for next year's quarterback class. Well, the quarterback the Jets end up taking will have Garrett Wilson, Omar Cooper Jr., Kenyon Sadiq, Mason Taylor, Breece Hall, Armand Menbo, and Olu Fashanu at tackles. He's going to be set up for success immediately. And not only that, but they ended up picking up some defense in D'Angelo Pons, who was maybe undersized, but still one of the better corners in the draft, and VJ Payne in the 7th round, who was widely regarded as possibly a 4th round pick. So they ended up getting a lot of value and filling a lot of holes, and not to mention David Bailey, who's going to give them their pure pass rusher they've been looking for the past couple of years. Now, to look at the worst teams, I had the Panthers, and there's not too much to really talk about the Panthers. I think there was just a lot of okay picks. Nothing jumps off the table, but nothing was really horrendous. I graded them at a C. Monroe Freeling, you got one of the top tackles. That's awesome. And then Chris Brazell, Lee Hunter, I wasn't high on his prospects, but you got a 1st round talent in the 2nd, and you got a 2nd round talent in the 3rd. So not too much there. And then nothing to really mention later on in the draft. The Packers, I graded as a D+. You don't have that many picks already. You spend your 1st pick on a corner that probably could have waited for your 2nd pick, and you end up taking a kicker later in the draft, so that's already a pick that you don't necessarily get a lot of value for. And there's nothing else that jumps off the page. Maybe Danny Dennis-Sutton, maybe Damani Jackson, but they're all depth players. And by far, my least favorite draft this year was the LA Rams. The LA Rams made 5 selections this year, and 5 selections this year, and one of which was a backup quarterback. Now, that wouldn't be as much of an issue if the backup quarterback didn't come at 13 overall. So for a team that has the reigning MVP and you're looking to refit, retool, and get back in contention for a Super Bowl, as you're 1 game short, drafting a backup quarterback and making it a Jordan Love situation makes sense when your quarterback is here to stay and he can stay above him. there's no real reason to spend a first round pick on that type of talent. And not only that, but there's no one that they drafted that becomes immediate impact, which basically means they're going to run it back from last year. So the entire roster gets a year older. You don't add much in free agency, and now you just added depth in the draft, and you didn't get a top tier where Makai Lemon they could have drafted. And it would have given them the ability to save Devontae Adams for what he has left, as well as Puka Nacua, who had injury issues last year. And now the one we all wanted to know, the Buffalo Bills. Now, I graded them as the 14th best draft in the NFL, and I gave them a B+. I thought they filled a lot of what they needed. Granted, I don't think they did it as early as they needed to. So TJ Parker, I don't necessarily hate the pick. I think he's a good player, and I think you're drafting for what he has produced rather than what he will produce. And then in the second round, you go up and get Davison Igbinosun, who is a good corner, but he's a man corner. He's handsy. He's had a lot of penalty issues. And then you start day 3 trading down 1 pick and passing up on Jermod McCoy to get Jude Bowery, offensive tackle from Boston College. And at this point, I was probably like a lot of Bills fans, and I was out. I was done with the draft already. And then Beane does what Beane does. He comes back, he drafts Skylar Bell with the 25th pick in the 4th round, and then the very next pick takes Caleb Elarms-Orr out of TCU, 2 players that will immediately make an impact and very well could start for Buffalo day 1. Then in the 5th round gets Jalen Kilgore, a safety who could have gone in the 2nd and is going to be a Swiss Army knife for Jim Leonhard on defense. Picks up Zane Durant, who again was probably a 3rd round talent, and he gets him late in the draft. Toriano Pride is going to be a great depth corner. So those 5 right there pulled me right back in, and I was okay with it, which is where you get the B+ from. Is the late round value was there and was really good. It was just the early value wasn't necessarily what you want to see from a team that has a couple holes and, again, needs to stay relevant in the contention, while some of these other good teams are having really good draft classes. So with that, I think the NFL draft provided a lot of insight as to where teams are looking into the next season. And the one glaring issue is I don't know what the Rams general management is doing, but it continues to work. And with that, we'll be back after this break.